We're going to get started, so let's have everybody come in, take a Siddur. You're going to open up to page 180. All right. So this is our last class. We're sort of finishing. We're going to finish up the Musaf today, and we'll have, I think, gone through 13 or 14 sessions between last year and this year. There's never an end to the discussion of prayer. So you got to at some point say, okay, this is where we're stopping for now. And basically, because the rabbi is away, I sort of made the decision this is as far as I should go, and I need the time to do other things on Sunday mornings, a lot of life cycle events, etc. So I apologize, but this is where we're at. Yes, I gave you the handout. Here, this one. What's that? No, this is we're finished with the Shabbos service. Before the high holidays, I have about 4 or 5 lectures I've given in the past. I can find a way to give those on all the different prayers from Kol Nidre to Al Chay to, so we can do that. So we're on page 180. What we have here is the announcement of the new moon, Rosh Chodesh. In the biblical period, this was a very significant day. It's just like Rosh Hashanah. Offerings were made on the day. Work was avoided, although it's not prohibited. On Rosh Hashanah, it's prohibited. On Rosh Chodesh, it's discouraged. And trumpets are sounded. Shofar is blown. All right? On the Shabbat before a new month, so this is where we announce all that's happening, the new month. And if you were yesterday, anybody who was here yesterday? One of the great moments of my career. We had in front of us for Rosh Chodesh, I said, David, come on up. David does this and announces the month of Tevet, and then I read it in English and say Tevet because that's what was in front of us. So the error is mine because it's mine to make sure it's actually accurate even though somebody gives it to me, and so the error is mine. I had so many other things going on in my head that morning with Renee and everything else, but nonetheless, and somebody else out, no, it's Shabbat. Yes, so after 45 years of announcing a new month, I missed one. Yeah, this is just another. There you go. So on the Shabbat before the new month, again, they didn't have calendars. They weren't sitting. Somebody had to announce it was coming up. And so you'd go to service, and when would they make the announcement? On Shabbat, when you had the largest crowd in front of you. So this became the tradition. And if you look in the middle of the page, that's exactly you see. The new month of blank will begin on blank. May it hold blessings in. So that is the core of this prayer. That's really the purpose of this prayer. In the Middle Ages, first of all, so this was introduced in the Middle Ages when, in biblical times, it was a major holiday. In the Middle Ages, it was a less significant, and they were worried. The reason it was entered here is it was losing its meaning. Nobody was doing it. So it's not a matter of it was emphasizing Rosh Chodesh. It was reminding people because they didn't care. And so they introduced this because it wasn't significant enough among the community. And to make that point, because people wouldn't remember, it's not said in the week before Rosh Hashanah. Because the assumption is you will know that one's coming. All right? So it really makes the point. Why is it there? To remind you it's coming, because you probably would not have remembered. There were no electronic calendars, but it also just fell out of routine because if it was just about the calendar, they still would have done it for Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of a new month. Somehow people did remember that new month. There are 4 different, yes, there are 4 different New Years in the tradition, but Rosh Hashanah is, they're not all ranked equally. There's a greater valence to Rosh Hashanah, okay? All right, and so people were aware of it for sure. Now, in addition, if you look at this first paragraph, over time they decided to say, well, let's add something additional. Let's add some specifics. So it says, and Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, grant that this coming month bring us goodness and blessing, bestow upon us a long life, a life that is peaceful, good, blessed, proper sustenance, physical vitality, conscious of heaven's demands and wary of sins. This is all added later. It's in a sense become very highlighted because the cantors often do compositions here. But the real core of the prayer, that's not the message of the prayer. The core of the prayer is the announcement. All right? And so, what you have, the congregation rises for this. The cantor holds the Torah, all the symbolism that is meant to be brought to emphasize this moment, holds the Torah, and he announces the new month. All right? And so, it's meant to say, this is important. It's throwing it in the faces of people who were forgetting that it had any meaning. Lance and then Gail. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. No, the question for those online was, it isn't until the 4th century that a calendar as we know it is constructed. Before that, it was done sort of haphazardly. They'd look up at the moon and say, this is when the days are. Somewhere in the 4th century, they put together a calendar. You could, if you go in my office, I have a book of the next 125 years. When does Rosh Hashanah fall? Right? There's no longer I have to look at the moon. Okay? Someone did the calculus, in a sense, to figure out when this is all going to play. So before, it had greater importance because they didn't know. Once you have a calendar, it serves a little less importance. Yes? No. So, yes, so you're right. In Second Temple times, first of all, there was no written calendar, constructed calendar, predicting calendar. So, yeah, in that time, they were up on the mountains blowing shofar and letting everybody know. But I think you're right. It's in the 4th century, as late Talmudic time, right? They constructed a calendar that could predict, and there was less necessity, and therefore it lost its oomph. That's the technical term. Lost its oomph. Okay? What's that? It's still oomph in Hebrew. Yes. That's right. Right. So this is, we now do this on a monthly basis. For us, even though we have calendars, most of us, don't really know when there's a new moon. By the way, new moon equals no moon. So if you look up in the sky and there's no moon, unless there's clouds, that means that's a new moon. No moon, new moon. Okay? It also is important because almost all the holidays fall on either the 1st or the 15th, which is either no moon or a full moon. And you can tell. But what do you do at Shavuot? Shavuot falls on the 7th. How do you determine exactly what like a quarter or a half moon is? You have to measure. That's why they ended up with the counting of the Omer. That way you could count the days from a full moon, which is the first day of Pesach, the 15th, until Shavuot, and it was very practical. Because this is the one holiday that doesn't fall out on one of those two moments, full or no moon. Yom Kippur is the same too, by the way. It's 10th day. Well, we know there's a 10-day period, so you need to know when the Rosh Chodesh is, Rosh Hashanah. Or you can't figure out when Yom Kippur happens. Right, so it really was significant in regulating the moments, the life cycle of the community. And actually, if you go back into Talmudic times, and there was disagreement between the Palestinian and the Babylonian communities as to who gets to declare the new month, and it was a critical issue because if you have people celebrating different days, you no longer have community. You lose community. The Jews in Israel, the Palestinian and the Jews in Babylonia, the rabbinic councils of the two. No. You still have to have somebody declare it. And the Babylonian rabbis at this point were saying, no, we're not listening to when the rabbis in Israel say it. We're going to make our own proclamation. And there's a whole discussion and sort of a battle and a war. And for the period of time at that point, the Israeli rabbis maintained their centrality until they disappeared, and then the Babylonians took over. All right, what you're asking is a different question. How did it get communicated? That's different. The two-day events is really, it is that time. It's before the calendar gets finalized. And it's an issue of, if I stand in Jerusalem and I blow shofar in a mountain, and somebody in a nearby mountain hears me, so they blow shofar. And another mountain, they hear it, and they keep going out as it gets extended. The further away you go, the longer it is until they get the message. And so outside of the land of Israel, they started observing 2 days because they weren't sure anymore. All right? Now, that whole argument is, I had this conversation, the Rabbi at Emmanuel, Hayim. I spoke with him, and what's that? Oren. Hayom. I'm sorry, there you go, Oren Hayom. I had lunch with him on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and I said to him, you're done. Oh my God, you're done. I got another day to go. Reality of it is, of all the things we do it because it's now tradition. But it is a ridiculous, if you really think about it, it is a ridiculous custom to have a second day because we can communicate in nanoseconds. I am not, do not quote me on that. I did not say that. We continue. Once something is a custom for about 200 years, it becomes the way of the people. Yeah, I don't know. They don't do the 2 days in any other holiday. Why Rosh Hashanah they do too? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I've heard that, and I'm sure there's some reason somewhere. Never going to happen. Because the Orthodox won't buy it, and then we're really not we're not living in the same world. Yeah. It's just not going to happen. Right. They've broken, in a lot of ways they've broken, and it has consequences for long-term connections among Jewish communities. Yeah. But but the Reform movement does not find itself and does not claim to say the rituals are binding. The conservative movement does. And so therefore, I don't see it happening. By the way, again, ritual is not ethics. Reform Judaism would say the ethics are absolutely binding, but the rituals are not. All right, look at page 183. We all know this. Hallelujah, Shema Donai, big major key. All right, much like the Baruch Hu. What you've got here is the cantor announces the first line, and then everybody joins in the second line. There's this announcement format to it. And the same like a Baruch Hu, we're about to return the Torah. Okay, the congregation responds in this universal God, his glory fills the entire earth. All right, and so you begin the procession. So the return of the Torah echoes and mirrors the taking out of the Torah, in that the entire procession, not the entire, but the vast majority of it is not about Torah. It's about God. It's the same message. Judaism is I've been saying this a lot recently. Judaism is very, very big on labeling and creating levels of holiness. Okay? So, for example, I remember I got yelled at in one service at one point by somebody, a rabbi. I had a chumash and I had a siddur. I put the siddur on top of the chumash. He yelled at me. The siddur is wonderful, but the Bible is the Bible. The Bible has to be on top. The Bible has priority. This tiering of levels of holiness is very important within Jewish tradition. And so we love Torah. We understand that Torah has holiness, but it doesn't compare to the holiness of God. And so yes. Yeah, there's a sequencing there, right? I'm sure it could. I'm sure there's a way somebody in some community has considered that. But we do things in a very regulated way. And so there's these tiers in a lot of different ways of how we do things. That this is more holy than that, and down and down and down and down. We have 7 Torah readings on Shabbat. We have 6 on Yom Kippur. We have 5 on the Shlosh Regalim, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. We have 4 on Rosh Chodesh. We have 3 on a Monday or Thursday. It's telling you that there's a tiering going on. To explain that. Question is connection to idolatry. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it can be. You want to make sure that the Torah doesn't become the ultimate source. And if it replaces God, it becomes a tool of idolatry. I did with the Chavarua last week a whole thing about by Yeshayahu Leibovitz, who talks about preventing the land of Israel from becoming too holy. Right, too holy because it's not God. There's this tiering that is very, T-I-E-R, not tearing like in crying. Tiering as in levels, okay? There's this tiering that is very crucial within Judaism. And no matter what levels you're doing, at the end of the day, God. Just that's the pyramid. That's the apex of the pyramid, and everything else, by comparison, is secondary. And so here you have a prayer where we march around with the Torah, and we're declaring, oh, by the way, the Torah's second status. Okay? It's God. And we do that through, let's read through the psalm. Acclaim Adonai, children of the divine, acclaim Adonai with honor and strength. Acclaim Adonai with the honor due God's name. Bow before Adonai in the splendor of the sanctuary. The voice of God thunders over the waters. You're going to hear this voice of God a lot. God, glorious thunders, Adonai over the great sea. The voice of Adonai with all its power. The voice of Adonai with all its majesty. The voice of Adonai shatters the cedars. Adonai shatters the cedars of Lebanon, making the trees dance like calves, the mountains of Lebanon and Sirion like wild bulls. The voice of Adonai forms flames of fire. The voice of Adonai convulses the wilderness. Adonai convulses the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of God makes hinds calves and strips forest bare. And in God's sanctuary, all acknowledge the glory of God. Adonai was enthroned above the flood waters, enthroned. Adonai is eternally sovereign. Adonai will grant strength to God's people. Adonai will bless them with peace. This voice of God that's being repeated is echoing Sinai. It's meant to elicit from you all the events of Sinai. You're hearing the covenantal agreement between God and the people. Mm-hmm. Right. God's voice is throughout the Torah, but here it's emphasizing that great moment of intimacy where the people encounter God at Sinai. All right? So that's a biggie. 2 other things here. Number 1, we read this prayer on Friday night as well. This is the prayer for the Friday night service. It's a prayer for Friday. We have a prayer for each day. It is all about God's control of nature. Because when we finish, the next thing is Shabbat. And God stops. It's highlighting God's power over nature. And the next thing is Lecha Dodi. And then the Psalm for Shabbat. So Lecha Dodi sort of serves as a connection, a bridge from the Friday to the Saturday. I often refer to it as like the 18 minutes that you have to make to light candles. You have 18 minutes from the moment of candle lighting until you have this sort of window of in-between time. That's Lecha Dodi. Yeah. Right. You don't even see the word Torah. It's not even there. It's very deliberate. You're right. It's pointing to the fact this is about God. We're marching Torah around in the way that you would march a king around the people in an enthronement, in an ordination. A coronation, that is the word I'm looking for, a coronation. All right, king would march out among the people. The Torah is the best we have. We don't have God to do that, but it's still just the Torah. And so while we're marching the Torah, we're singing about God. All right. We began with a procession around. We end with a procession around. And at the end of this day, look, it finishes up here. Adonai was enthroned above the waters, enthroned. In other words, as the Torah is put back in the ark, everything is back the way it should be. God's now sitting on the throne again. Everything's at peace. And the words you say, every week I get up there and I say, Uvenucho Yomar, when the ark was set down, when it's all returned to its peaceful place. Most of the Psalms were attributed to David. The vast majority, not all, but most of them were. It could be. And there's a sermon there somewhere, a drosh. Okay, it definitely could be. But what we've got here is a returning of, we've taken the Torah out, we've brought it out to the people, and now it's over. God is now, the ceremony is over. God now is sitting on the throne, and he's become, we've coronated him. All is back as it should be. Okay, the ark is at rest. And then we get to the last line here. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha. We all sing this. Hashivenu Adonai. All right? This is, if you may remember, if you've been for Tisha B'Av, this is the last verse from Lamentations, from Eicha. They took it from there. It's the last verse that is chanted in Eicha. And in a sense, it expresses the hope of restoration of the temple. Eicha is all this tragedy, and it finishes up with this prayer for hope of return. Return to the land, return of the temple, return of all the ways of being able to connect to God. So God is on the throne, and we're expressing, we complete it with a prayer for a hope for even greater, deeper relationship with God. That's really what it's about. Hashivenu, we're returning. It's the same root as tshuva, to return. All right? Elecha, to you. So how do they translate it? Turn us toward you, Adonai, and we will return. V'nashuva, chadesh yamenu, renew our days, kikedim, as they once were. Take us back to a time when things were right. However you want to define that. All right, so we've done the new month. We've done the returning of the Torah. Everything is now calm and settled and done. We should have no more services, right? We're done. And on a weekday, and many times we are. However, we now turn to the bottom of 184, and we find the Musaf service. Musaf means additional, extra. It's an additional offering. So in the temple, they would do a morning and an afternoon sacrifice. On Shabbat, they would do an additional morning sacrifice. They added an extra sacrifice. And so, anytime there was a sacrifice, we have an Amidah. That's why I've said to you multiple times, there's no such thing as a service if you don't have an Amidah. The Amidah represents the sacrifice that was done. So they did a second one on Saturday morning. So we do a second Amidah to remember the fact that this was the practice in the temple. So weekdays, we don't have a Musaf. Shabbat, we do. Festivals, we do. Yes, sir. And then Musaf. The repeating is different. The repeating is a function. So you have two Amidot. You have the repetition because for much of history, you didn't walk into a synagogue and find one of these. This is a printing press. This is the 1500s. Okay? That means for the vast majority of Jewish history, there was no such thing. So most people could not pray the Amidah on their own. And so what would happen is those who could would do it privately. And then the cantor would repeat it as a way of people being able to fulfill the blessings by saying Amen to his word. He'd say the blessing, they'd say Amen. They're fulfilled in that manner. Their obligations are fulfilled. The Amidah particularly. What was the first thing you said? Raw? You're correct. Somehow in the temple, they obviously lit flames of some sort. Whether they transferred them or whatever, I don't know. But I can't answer what you're asking is a question of how do they start a fire on Shabbat to offer a sacrifice, and I don't have the answer to that. It was a miracle. Yeah, that may have been the case. They may have just kept it going. But right, but even in Shabbat, even on Shabbat, keeping a flame going, I guess you can, as long as you don't do anything to enhance it and increase it. You can keep going. That's why you have a blecht. Right, but the question is, how did they keep the fire going for 24 hours? There's still something that's not making sense here. But technically you can't add wood. You're right. By Shabbat law, so the question, how did the rabbis or the priests do that which we don't do? Your next lesson. It's possible the priests had an exemption. Yes, Leslie. Right. You can get an oven where, yeah. Right, so you have the issue of do you leave it on overnight or not? But you can where it just, in other words, what happens is the gas line continually, you set it in advance and it just continues. You're not doing anything and it continues to burn as a result. That's not the same thing as lighting a fire with wood. You have to keep putting more wood on it or it's just simply going to burn out. So I don't know the answer. Lance. It's possible, but they often referred to the temple as the Beit HaMikdash. Right. It was very deliberate in their wording. I don't know the answer. I don't know. Clearly, there's a distinction. You've raised a good question, I don't know. But nonetheless, they did have a second sacrifice. And the reality is, therefore, we have this Musaf, which is meant to remind us of that fact that today in some way is different than the rest of the week. Not just for the latecomers. That's exactly it. Like going from the preliminary into the Shacharit service, where it's really not two different services. It's a service that's sort of divided. There's a comma there, the half Kaddish. It's one long service with the division. The same thing is true in going from the Torah service to Musaf. It's really one long service, and so what you've got here is this comma, the half Kaddish. All right? So it's one long service being divided into two sections. All right, flip the page, 185, and you will recognize this. Here you have the beginning of the Amidah. All right, we talked about this in Shacharit, so I'm not going to repeat all the details of the Amidah, but I'm going to talk about what makes Musaf distinct. So with that in mind, we're going to turn to Kedusha, page 187. I don't know why in this prayer book, it really is about a number of biblical verses. In the previous, it was very clear what was bolded in the previous prayer book. Here it's not quite as clear. It is bolded. You can see Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh is slightly darker. You can see Shema is slightly darker. Baruch Kavod Adonai Yimloch. But I would have made a far greater distinction because those are the biblical verses around which the entire thing is based. All right? So the Kedusha is actually composed of an interweaving, first of two prophetic versions, that of Isaiah, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 Adonai Tzivaot, the world is filled with God's glory. That's from Isaiah. All right? And you can see they made it important enough in the translation, they made you the singing parts. It's clear. All right? And then you have another from Ezekiel. You have Baruch Kavod Adonai Mim Komo. Then you get to this Shema, which we've talked about. Shema is here because there were times in which it was forbidden to recite Shema in its proper place. And so they'd come in, make sure you weren't saying it, and the rabbis would sneak it in later. So here it is in the Musaf Amidah. All right, we had it in the Torah service as well. Right, and then the last verse is from Psalms. Yimloch Adonai li'olam Elohai Tzion. And so let's look at some of this. A couple comments on this. So what you have here in heaven, this is the angels. One chorus of angels responding to another. And on earth here, the congregation is sort of reenacting that. Okay? Then a couple things. You have, look down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the top. Where is God's glory? Where? Okay? All right. Where is God's dwelling on earth? Some answered it's in heaven. Some answered nobody can really know. Menachem Mendel says it's wherever we let God in. You've all heard that before. It's searching for God. I have a friend who's been posting, and he has no sense of God at all. But he's walking around, and he's posting. He takes his walks of nature and the world around him. And he's seeing this is lovely. I'm special. God in the world and the nature around him. He would know. I do. Where is God? When you recognize it. That's radical amazement. This aye, this word, the Kabbalists have a whole different way of understanding it. All right? They say that the letters of aye, Aleph, Yud, Hey, represent et Yom HaShabbat. And therefore, where can you best find God? On Shabbat. Et aye, Aleph, Yud, Hey, et Yom HaShabbat. All right? And the Kabbalists would say, where is God most easily found, most manifest? On Shabbat. Get your butts to shul on Shabbat, because God's sitting there waiting for you. All right. And what you've got through here is this reciprocal relation. We announce our own words, not Aritzacha. We revere, we sanctify, we do this, and then we read God's words back. Yimloch Adonai Le'olam, or Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. There's this dialogue that's going on between. All right, it's a reciprocal call and response. On one hand, God calls to us and we answer. On the other hand, we call to God and God responds by bringing redemption. This is, if you one of Heschel's books is called God in Search of Man. There's one man in search of God, but there's also God in search of man. There are moments, Heschel would say, when God is simply reaching down and saying, I want connection. And are you reaching up at that moment? And you don't know when it's going to be. So the more mitzvot you do, the more moments in which you're reaching up, the more likely the connection will happen when God chooses to reach down. That's what Heschel would say. Your job is to do mitzvot so that if and when God's reaching down, you'll be a receptacle to that connection. Right. God set up the world in such a way that God needs man to be a partner in process, and mitzvot are part of that. He has no partner. Now, could God have made a perfect world? I'm sure he could have. God chose to establish a world of partnership. And therefore, what we do matters. Go down a few more lines. Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu. He is our God. He is our parent. Hu Malkeinu. He is our sovereign. Hu Mosheinu. He saves us. V'hu Yashmienu Barachamav. And we will be saved in mercy. Shenit. A second time. We are living in the in-between. The in-between of the Exodus redemption and ultimate redemption at the end of time. God's redeeming at one time and God's ultimate redemption at the other. We are in that middle stage. That's what this Shenit is talking about. Was the Exodus. Yeah. We're not talking messianism. We're talking about God's redemption. Don't confuse the two. Yeah, otherwise it echoes Jesus. I hear that. This is not about messianism. This is about God direct. God as Redeemer. Okay, flip the page. Any questions? It's just like my first hour. Nobody have any questions? Except Steve. There you go. That's exactly it. So now we have it is the middle blessing. And remember, all Amidot start out with 3 blessings of praise. All Amidot finish with 3 blessings of thanks. It is what is in between that distinguishes one Amidah from another. So you have on weekdays all the requests. On Shabbat, you have a blessing of Mikadesh HaShabbat, sanctifying Shabbat. That's the middle blessing. The same thing is true here in the Musaf service, except that which leads into that blessing is a little different. So you start with, take a look in the middle of 188a. You'll see, Tikanta Shabbat Ratzita Korbenotecha Tzivita Perusheha. It's all about, you establish Shabbat and desired its offerings. This is about the sacrifice, okay? It's about the sacrifice. But I want you to notice something. Look at the letters of the first letter of every word. It's a reverse acrostic. They used an acrostic. It's like Z, Y, backwards in the alphabet. They used an acrostic. They were generally trying to say everything. They were trying to be all-inclusive. By citing every letter, it's just a way of saying, and there's nothing outside of this range. And so the sacrifice was a fully embracing experience. And Adonai, our God, it was at Sinai, you commanded its observance and commanded our ancestors to offer an additional appropriate sacrifice on Shabbat. Could it be more clear what we're doing? It tells you right there. This is the extra sacrifice made on Shabbat. Sacrifice is replaced by Amidah. Amidah is not just one more prayer in the service. The Amidah is the prayer. Everything else is nice, but the Amidah is the prayer. It represents the sacrifice. The entire theme of the Musaf Amidah, the main characteristic, is its emphasis on either in the Orthodox prayer book it says Naaseh, we will again rebuild the temple. In more modern and conservative synagogues it says Asu, remember when we were in the temple. Right? We're not looking forward to a rebuilding of a third, but we are referencing the historical connection. The entire Musaf Amidah is arranged around that concept. Musaf, additional sacrifice. It does. Yes, it does. It gets rid of the whole sacrificial system because there are those in our movement who say we don't even want to talk about it. I not being one of them. I like historical. I don't have to say I want a sacrifice. I don't have to say I want the historical connection. I want the connection to my grandparents. I want the connection to their grandparents and going back and back and back. I want context, historical context to what I'm doing. Doesn't mean I have to do exactly what they did. I'm not offering up the sacrifices again, but I'm framing my experience within historical Judaism. That is part of the discussion that's going on today in today's modern world of Judaism. Right. Are we living in a period like the rabbis did where they literally created a new Judaism because the temple was destroyed? And for those who say, yes, that's what we're at, then history doesn't matter anymore. We need a new Judaism. For those who say this is not like that, it's more a matter of a linear process, we maintain, but we also we frame it in our historical experience. We don't forget it. Right. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So there is no question. The paper I just finished this morning at 8 o'clock this morning is for a class in post-Enlightenment theology, and the topic I chose to do it about and frame it with is how do the Siddurim of the movements differ as a response to the theologians of post-Enlightenment time? Okay? Yes. What's that? William James was not a rabbi, but doesn't mean there's not wisdom to learn from without. Right. Okay? So each of our movements, the whole idea, you'll know this, in the Reconstructionist, Asher Bacharbanu, who's chosen us, it ain't there. Wait till we get to Aleinu, I got more for you. Okay, let's go to Ein Keloheinu, page 204. This is a first millennium prayer. It is a mystical meditation. You'll notice that it's the same words over and over and over. The word mantra comes to mind. Okay? It is meant to take you to someplace else. It's mystical in its nature. The repetitions created an ecstatic, visionary state. And because of the repetitions, it's easy to recall. Right? It's easy. It's a mantra. And we all sing. By the way, the melody we use, Ein Keloheinu, it was a German drinking song. Yeah, right. Yes, absolutely. It also, if you look at this, the first two lines and then the second two lines seem to be out of sequence. Look at what it says. There is no other God. There is no other Lord. There is no other King. There is no other Savior. Who is our God? It would seem to be, it should be the other way around. Who's our God? There is none other. This is our God. It seems out of sequence. So, of course, rabbis don't let this pass. They had a comment. Why is it that way? Because if you look at the first letter, Aleph, Ein, the next letter, Mi, Chamocha, Mem, and the next one, Nodeh, you have the word Amen. This was the last prayer of the service. It ended here. There was no Aleinu. There was no Adon Olam. This was the end of the service. And so, what do you do with them? Amen. Now, is that true? Who knows? It's a great story. It's a great story. All right, Aleinu, far more deep. And it references the sacrifices again. Shehiktiru ketoret samim. They still have it. They don't. Is it not there? The Reform movement, it's there. Do you know in the Reconstructionist movement, did they have the last line? The last line where it says, Tahu shehiktiru avotenu, where you sacrificed, they sacrificed, our father sacrificed to you. Lefanecha, is it removed? All right, which would make sense. Yeah, would make sense. Look, again, all I insist on is consistency. If you have a theology, your prayer should represent your theology. Right? When we do Bir Karamazon and we sing, I was old, I was young, I never saw a tzaddik who was hungry, Mordecai Kaplan went nuts. He yelled at Elliot Dorff for singing that. Right? Of course you've seen one. How could you sing something you don't? That's not true. Not unless it stayed there. Visionary. Okay. Aleinu. It is upon us, l'shabeach l'adon hakol, to praise the ruler of all, to Creator who has not made us merely a nation, not formed us as all earthly families, not given us an ordinary. That is the most cleaned up translation I could imagine. Now let me tell you what it really says. Yes, it's upon us to praise, shevach, to give praise to the Lord of all, to declare his greatness of the Creator. And then, Shelo asanu ki goyeh ha'aratzot, who has not made us like the other nations of the world. Velo samanu k'mishpechot adama, who has not placed us. This is a biblical dyad. It says the same thing twice in different words. Who has not placed us like the rest of the families of the earth. Okay? Shelo sam chelkenu kahem. Our portion, we get is different from every other nation on the planet. There is no more particularistic prayer in the Siddur than the Aleinu. It is a denial that everybody else is the same. And to make that step a little bit further, because I'm short on time, and so I want to make sure I get to this. I'll come back to, if I have other time, to the others. There is a line that has been removed. There was a line that was in this text that said, Shehem Ishtachavim, the Hevel Varik, for they bow down to vanity and emptiness and pray to a God, now listen to this, that cannot save them. Who are they talking about? This is a polemic against Christians, not non-Jews, Christians. It is clearly a polemic. This is written in the Middle Ages, in the middle of Christian abuse of Jews. And you're talking about the Crusades. You're talking about the Inquisition. You're talking about people who are watching their families burned and killed, and they have no way to respond, and they respond in polemic. If you look in the Art Scroll Siddur, they still have it. The Sephardic, by the way, because it was taken out in Prussia, which is basically the Ashkenazic world. Sephardic world, it wasn't removed, and the Orthodox now still have it in parentheses. So if you'd like to say it, you can say it. Some people say. So time out. So let me go back to something I said in the very first class. The Siddur is different than every other document we have. It has never been closed. It is an open document. And so what it is, I use the expression that it is a historical tell, meaning like Tel Aviv. If you dig down further, you find earlier civilizations. The further you dig down, the deeper the civilizations. The prayer book is one that has been added to and added. And so as you look at the prayer book, often what you're getting is not just prayers, you're getting an insight into what was important and what was concerning the people in different time frames. And did you ever hear the prayer for the state of Israel? Yep. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. So yes, but it is an open document. By the way, once something got added, God forbid anything should be removed, and so it just keeps growing. All right? But yes, you're correct. Not all of it. All of the poetry, they have all these piyutim in the high holidays. Those are all Middle Ages. That's all Middle Age additions to the text. The first written Siddur isn't really until about the 9th century, the 800s. Okay, and from that point on, but there's the difference here, and why you can add to it. There's, at least among the Orthodox, a claim that the Bible is divine. The source is divine. There's a claim that Mishnah and Talmud, the source is divine. There is no claim that the Siddur is divine. It's man-written. It's a response. It's man's reaching out to connect with God. It is a different document. But as a result, It's also the most commonly understood and known document. We read it. It's what we. If you ask Jews, they know the Siddur. If people come to services at all, will know the Siddur better than they'll know the Bible. And so it's not just prayers. You're actually being taught what Jews do. You're reciting 150 mantras of how to behave. Yigdal is Maimonides' 13 principles. And we go, Yigdal, Elohim Chai. We all know this. We're singing Maimonides' principles of Jewish life. So it's a prayer book, it's a historical document, it's an educational tool. There is no more play. Yes, this is chosenness on steroids. I'm going to use the phrase again. This is chosenness at its top level. It's so particularistic. It's about Israel. We have it different than them. We wrote this prayer. Christians saw what it said. And by the way, here's one of the arguments they made. The word for an emptiness, varik. Let's take the letters of the word varik. Vav has a value of 6. Has a value of 100. Yud has a value of 10. Uf has a 200, 316. Do you know what Yeshu, Jesus' name, the numerical value is? Yud is 10, Shin is 100, Vav is 6. Well, that's John 3:16, that you can't get to heaven without God. It's not the same thing, but it does parallel, yes. I don't know that they actually sat down and figured that out, but it was used as a way of saying, see, this is what you meant all along. Now, they probably did mean that. This was it's easy to sit here in the 21st century when life is good and Christians and Jews basically get along. It's not really a problem. There's a couple people out there, there's a problem. But when you're watching your families burned, you're not going to have the same reaction. And if you're powerless, you turn to polemic. And this was originally added only on Rosh Hashanah. It was the introduction to the Malchuyot service in which you're talking about God being enthroned. That is where it was sourced. Over time, it got added. That's in the 10th century. Over the next 2 centuries, it got added to Yom Kippur as well. And somewhere around 300 years later, it was appended to all services throughout the year. Rosh Hashanah first. They added it on Yom Kippur later, and then it got added to the full service. Remember, I said to you, Ein Keloheinu, Amen, was the end of the service. Now, Aleinu is the end of the service. That's why people take off their tefillin. Everything after Aleinu is not part of the service. All right, we add Kaddish as a way of sort of study. All right, it's like we studied. And then we add a Donin, yet another poem. And we're always adding. But Aleinu now really finishes the service because you're finishing up. Look what the last words are on page 206. Bayom hahu, on that day, Yihiyeh Adonai Echad, the Lord will be one, Ushmo Echad, and his name one. What more is there to say? We are done. That's the end. This is originally in the 10th century. It was part of the 10th century composed for the Rosh Hashanah service right before. And if you see the service, it's the introduction to the Malchuyot service. And this is where on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, and then on Yom Kippur, we also bend our knee, right, and we bow. Remember, what did I say about the word Baruch? What does it mean? It doesn't mean blessed. It doesn't mean praise. It means knee. Berech is a knee. When you bend, you're lowering yourself in the presence of God. You're establishing one of those tiers of holiness. You are less. It's humility. Baruch means humility. When we bow and prostrate, that's exactly what we're saying. We're standing in the presence of God, and by comparison, finish the sentence. Lay out completely. Could you be more vulnerable than laying out flat on the ground? Right, absolutely. It's an expression of humility in the face of God. Berech, ni, baruch, ni, lowering, reducing, humility. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah. But it's not a replacement. It says, Asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torah, who chose us from amongst all the people. What were we chosen for? Giving of the Torah. So they just got rid of the first half of it and still embraced the giving of Torah. Yeah. Look, the in this paper, one of the things I focused on was this line, and I opened up the whole discussion with the fact that there's no demographic in society that doesn't think that it's either special or chosen for some purpose. That's just human behavior, all right? Nationalism. Could we use a better example? Of course America's the best. Is it really? Who cares? We believe that. And in England, they believe that. They believe that England's the best. That's normal human behavior. Christianity Catholicism in particular, has the most extreme example of chosenness. If you don't believe what we believe, you're not going to heaven. Could there be a greater statement of chosenness? That's it. That's the pinnacle. So Jews have one too, just like everybody else. All right? Now, but we not only think we're different and special, then you get to the high holidays and you get to the festival Amidah. Atavech artanu mikol amim, you've chosen us from all the people, and this is where it gets even more problematic. Viromamtanu mikol al shanot, who's raised us above everybody else. Now it's not just distinction, it's hierarchical. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I don't have an answer. Lance. Right. So the mystics would buy completely the whole sort of spiritual component of chosenness. The rationalists will do exactly what you say, and that is that chosenness, as the blessing says, means Torah, acceptance of Torah, and thereby anybody can opt in. It's not by birth. As a Jew by birth is not chosen. The Jew has to choose to be chosen. And anybody can do that. You accept Torah, you're chosen. That would be the rational response. Again, it depends on when you talk about the Orthodox. Are you talking about the Hasidim, who would have a much more mystical approach, or are you talking about the Miknagdim, who would be in a more rational place? Orthodoxy is not monolithic. You have to not do that, and you have to watch. Same thing. You couldn't say that about what do conservative Jews believe. I can't tell you that. It's all over the place. I can tell you what different rabbis think, but it's not monolithic. Okay? It tends to be more in the Orthodox movement. That I'll accept. Okay? Yes. On that note, we better get out of here because we're going to be bombarded by children shortly. Thank you all. This has been a pleasure. You've helped me learn and process.